Abolish the Federal Reserve. Subtitled, The Federal Reserve Made Simple. A presentation of Abolish Productions. Delivered on July 4th, 2011. My name is Ralph Epperson, and I will be the one presenting this material today. I'm a writer, researcher, and historian who has studied over 200 years of America's history for nearly 50 years of my life. I'm a graduate of the Business College at the University of Arizona, but what I will be discussing today was not presented to me while I was a student there. It has come from independent research into the subjects I've written about. I published my book entitled The Unseen Hand in 1985, and it is still being printed today. And in fact, much to my surprise, I was asked by publishers in 6 foreign nations for permission to publish it in their language, in their country, and I gladly provided it. But the information that I will be discussing today, as I said, was not offered to me in my business courses, but in fact I was generally presented with just the opposite information from what I've discovered in my independent study. And as I am hoping, you will begin to see that those who gave us the Federal Reserve System did not want us to learn the truth for a very important reason. Let me start by explaining that all of us are teachers in America's largest university. Everyone in America is our student body. Every building in America is our campus. And every conversation we have is a classroom lecture. In other words, we need to become educated so that we can educate others. And the reason that we need to be educated is simply because America is in serious trouble. And the solution is education. So this DVD will be a class entitled The Federal Reserve Made Simple, because I believe that the average American knows little about the Federal Reserve and how it does not serve our interests. And that is why I prepared this presentation. A good place to start would be in the scriptures to show that 2 enormous truths are revealed in its pages. The first is from 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 10. For the love of money is the root of all evil. Notice that it is not money itself, it is the love of money. Money has no morality, it is neutral, but it does have the ability to be of service to mankind. But it can also be used to destroy, as we shall soon see. And the second comes from Proverbs chapter 22, verse 7. The borrower is servant to the lender. We are going to talk about the borrowers and the lenders during this presentation. I believe the next thing we must do is define the 2 words directly related to money. The first is inflation. Inflation allows you to carry money in a basket and your goods in a wallet. Inflation allows you to live in a more expensive neighborhood without moving. Inflation is the price we pay for all of those government benefits we thought were free. I want you to know that this is the last time I'll buy some jokes from off of the internet. Those jokes are not very funny, but they do show that inflation does have a price to pay. First of all, let me give you a traditional definition of the word. This comes from page 13 of a booklet entitled The American Economic System and Your Part in It, published by the Advertising Council. This is how they define the word. Inflation is a rise in the general level of prices. Then it goes on to explain that there were 3 basic causes of inflation. The first is when consumers, businesses, and governments spend too heavily on available goods and services, this high demand can force prices up. The second way is if costs of production rise and producers try to maintain profit levels, prices must increase. And the third is the lack of competition between producers can also contribute to inflation. In other words, there's but one cause of inflation, and that is people. We, the people, are the guilty ones who cause inflation. Notice that there is no mention of the real cause, and that cause is the Federal Reserve, as I will now try to prove. Let me give you the dictionary definition of the word. It is defined as an increase in the quantity of money. Inflation always produces a rise in the price level. Therefore, inflation has a cause and an effect. The cause is an increase in the money supply, and the effect is a rise in the price level. Notice that the people do not have the ability to print money to increase the quantity. When people increase the money supply by printing it, it is called counterfeiting, and it is a crime against property rights. Money is property, and when someone counterfeits the money supply, it decreases the value of the real money, meaning the property in money in circulation, and it is a form of stealing. Stealing is defined as taking property from another without permission. And in America, stealing is punished by our legal system. In other words, counterfeiting is a crime called stealing. But when the Federal Reserve increases the money supply by printing money, it is not called counterfeiting. It is called funding the deficit. Even though the two crimes are identical. Funding the deficit is a crime against property rights and should be punished. Just like you and I would be if we increased the money supply. When I was in my business college economics classes at the University of Arizona, my professors explained that this dictionary definition was wrong. I was taught that inflation was caused by cost push, demand pull, unions, shortages, housewives, etc. In other words, we really do not know what causes inflation. All we know is that people cause it, but we don't know how they do it. That is what I was being taught. Yet we learned in the dictionary definition that it is caused by an increase in the money supply. So one of these definitions is in error. Someone is not telling the truth. So if the people cannot increase the money supply without being guilty of a crime, we must look for some agency that can increase the money supply without being guilty of a crime, and we shall soon identify the culprit. There's another word we must define, and that is the word deflation. Deflation is defined as a decrease in the money supply causing prices to drop. Perhaps the best way I can explain how this works is by using this simple illustration. I live in Tucson, Arizona. Let's just say that a fleet of helicopters fly over the city at 3 in the morning and drop out billions of American dollar bills. The next morning, when people find the new money, they will want to spend it, and they will visit stores in the city. They will want to purchase items that they could not afford in the past. When great numbers of people show up at a store with a lot of money, the people bid up the prices of the available goods. Let's say that the people are trying to buy a high-definition television set with a regular price of $1,000. When the people show up, The first bid will be for $1,000, the next will be for $1,100, the next $1,200, etc., until the price could be as high as maybe $4,000 or $5,000. It all depends on how much money has been found by the highest individual bidder. In other words, prices will increase with an increase in the money supply. And prices can really rise high if there are billions of new dollars in circulation. Prices could reach into the millions of dollars for the television set. As I said, it just depends on how many dollars were dropped from the air. There is a word to describe this condition. It's called hyperinflation, defined as excessive inflation causing a large increase in prices. Then let's just say that 1 week later, those who dropped all of the new money from the helicopters come to collect it because it was counterfeit. They would also gather up all of the real money that they could find because they would have to certify that it is not counterfeit as well. The result of all this is that there will be a rapid drop in the money supply, and to induce sales, merchants will lower their prices. It is even possible for the price to drop below the original price. Now there is a reason that nations hyperinflate their currency. It was described by John Maynard Keynes, called by many as the most influential economist of the 20th century. This is what he wrote in his book entitled The Economic Consequences of the Peace in 1920. Lenin, the communist leader of Russia, is said to have declared that the best way to debauch the capitalist system, to destroy the capitalist system was to debauch the currency. And then he told us how to do that. By a continuing process of inflation. So notice here that he is defining inflation just like the dictionary does, an increase in the quantity of money. So by this process of inflation, government can confiscate, secretly and unobserved, an important part of the wealth of their citizens. By this method, they not only confiscate, but they confiscate arbitrarily. And while the process impoverishes many, it actually enriches some. There is no subtler, no surer means of overturning the existing basis of society than to debauch the currency. The process engages all the hidden forces of economic law on the side of destruction. Now notice here that Mr. Keynes just said that inflation is an economic law, which means that prices will rise whenever the money supply is increased. It will happen each time it is practiced on every continent and in all economic systems. Now let me return to the Keynes quotation. He continued, and does it in a manner not one man in a million is able to diagnose. Let me try and summarize what Mr. Keynes just taught us. Nikolai Lenin, the communist, said if you want to destroy the capitalist system, you must first debauch the currency. And communists worldwide want to destroy the capitalist system. And the way to do that is through the printing press. Print large quantities of money and pump it into the marketplace, and it will destroy the value of money. And to show you that Lenin did debauch the currency by the process known as inflation, he increased the quantity of money nearly 20,000 times from 1921 to 1923. This is a cartoon that appeared in the Chicago Tribune newspaper on April the 21st, 1934. Notice the year, 1934. And it provides in a capsule form just what this strategy of the communist is. It shows in cartoon form a drawing of what appears to be Leon Trotsky, a fellow communist leader besides Nikolai Lenin in Russia, sitting at a large board with the following quote, "Plan of action for the United States," end quote, written on the top. It says this: spend, spend, spend under the guise of recovery. Bust the government, blame the capitalists for the failure, junk the Constitution, and declare a dictatorship. That sounds exactly like what is happening in the United States today. Now let me return to the discussion of Lenin's quote. The third thing he said is that inflation will steal from most, but it actually enriches some. And here's why. The poor do not have money, so they're not directly affected. The middle class has its wealth in money, meaning the money they get paid for their labor and which they use to pay their bills. They put whatever they can save into banks, but inflation destroys the value of their money in banks as well. The rich do not place their assets in money. They invest in stocks, art, property, etc. So as the value of money decreases, their value in their assets generally rise. That is what Keynes meant. The rich are the ones who benefit the most in periods of hyperinflation. Then he repeats it. The best way to destroy capitalism is to debauch the currency. And then he said that only 1 in a million would be able to diagnose the problem. But now you know, so you are the 1 person in a million who understands just how money can be used to destroy. I would also like to point something else out about the economist John Maynard Keynes, because he wanted to destroy the capitalist system as well. Notice here that the real title of his book, The Economic Consequences of the Peace, is The End of Laissez-faire, which is French for the free enterprise system. So it was not just Lenin who wanted to destroy capitalism, it was John Maynard Keynes as well. This is what he said about the capitalist system. The decadent capitalism in the hands of which we found ourselves after World War I is not a success. It is not intelligent, it is not beautiful. It is not just, it is not virtuous. And it does not deliver the goods. In short, we dislike it and are beginning to despise it. So his writings were intended to support those who wish to destroy the capitalist system. Now I would like to show you that the ideas of John Maynard Keynes have had effect all over the world. As this presentation was being prepared, nations in various parts of the world have experienced rioting in the streets to protest the cuts in government budgets due to the ideas of Mr. Keynes. Mr. Keynes has advanced the idea that government spending is the answer to the alleged weaknesses of the economy. And governments have increased their entitlement funding, meaning they have increased the amount of money the government spends to give its citizens government handouts. After a while, the government discovers that they cannot find enough ways to fund all of these entitlements, and they start reducing the amount of money they pay the citizen. When the citizens learn that the government is cutting their entitlements, they go to the streets in violent demonstrations protesting the cuts. And all of these nations listened to John Maynard Keynes. This is Dr. Friedrich Hayek, a prominent member of the Austrian School of Economics and a 1974 Nobel Prize winner. This is how he described it. The responsibility for current worldwide inflation rests wholly and squarely with the economists who've embraced the teachings of John Maynard Keynes. It was on the advice and even urging of his pupils. that governments have financed the increasing parts of their expenditures by creating money on a scale which every reputable economist before Keynes would have predicted would cause precisely the sort of inflation we have got. So we must acknowledge the brilliance of the architect of this strategy to destroy the free enterprise system. Thank you, John Maynard Keynes. The world truly owes you a huge debt of gratitude. Actually, I should say the world truly owes you a huge debt. Now that we know that the communists want to destroy capitalism, I think it is appropriate to discuss where Lenin, the communist, learned how we should do this. This is Karl Marx, the so-called father of communism. And this is the 100th anniversary edition of the Communist Manifesto that he wrote for the Communist Party in 1848. And here, it is in here that he declared that the communists should destroy the value of the money owned by the middle class. This is what he wrote on page 45. The proletariat, defined as the working class, the poor, meaning the lowest class in the nation, will use its political supremacy to wrest, by degrees, all capital from the bourgeoisie. Now the bourgeoisie is defined as the middle class, not the very wealthy. And then he tells the communists how to use a list of 10 measures that will destroy the capitalist system. I shall concentrate on the fifth one as it has bearing to our study of the Federal Reserve, and this is what he wrote. Number 5, centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with an exclusive monopoly. So with the central bank in their hands, the communists could wrest all of the capital from the middle class. And President Woodrow Wilson and the Congress of the United States followed the teaching of the communist Karl Marx in 1913 when they created a national bank with an exclusive monopoly called the Federal Reserve. So the power to destroy by using money to inflate the economy was given to a central bank in the United States, just as the communist Karl Marx had instructed our government. Please notice that the communist Marx wanted to use the poor as a way of wresting all of the capital from the middle class, as I said, not the very wealthy. And the reason for that is that it is the very wealthy of a nation who want to destroy the middle class in that nation by the use of a central bank. And the major reason is that the middle class often has collected enough capital to compete with the rich class. And they do so by lowering the price of any product they manufacture. And the very wealthy decided to create an economic system called communism to restrict the ability of the middle class to compete. And that is the way that they did that, because they learned to debauch the currency through a central bank. So it has been the very wealthy who are the ones behind the communist movements of the 19th, 20th, and 21st centuries. I cover this in my book entitled The Unseen Hand, and I would once again recommend that you read it. I will provide you with the ample documentation that it is the very wealthy who found the advantages of supporting the communist movement. Let me now provide you with the two recent examples of the use of hyperinflation to destroy. This is a 500 billion denarii bill issued as recently as the 1990s in the European nation formerly known as Yugoslavia. The young man who sent it to me as an example of hyperinflation told me that it wouldn't even buy an egg. That is called hyperinflation. A second example of hyperinflation is occurring right now in Zimbabwe, the African nation formerly known as Rhodesia. This is a picture of a Zimbabwean trillionaire holding up a 100 trillion Zim dollar in January of 2011. The tourist in Zimbabwe can purchase one for $5 American. That is also called hyperinflation. Now, I do not know why the government in Rhodesia, or actually Zimbabwe, is hyperinflating their currency, but my guess is that it is because the people in that nation are poor, which means they do not have a lot of money. So the government solved the problem by giving everyone, or making everyone, a trillionaire. Then everyone can purchase the goods that they could not afford in the past. Of course, when there's a shortage of goods, no matter how much money you have, there's nothing to buy. This is one of the fallacies of the socialist or communist economy. They think that poverty is abolished by giving everyone money. But they're wrong. Poverty is abolished by increasing the amount of products produced, thereby enabling producers to compete by lowering prices. Producers of goods want their customers to have a living wage so that they can buy their products. The proof of the destruction caused by hyperinflation lies in its results. Unemployment in Zimbabwe has risen to 85%, and the gross domestic product has declined from $720 per capita in 2002 to $265 in 2008. Yes, hyperinflation works to destroy. Let me now start the discussion of who in America controls the amount of money in circulation. The Constitution of the United States delegated the authority to make money to Congress. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 5 says this: Congress shall have the power to coin money, and regulate the value thereof, and fix the standard of weights and measures. First of all, notice that they included this power to coin money in the section in which they set the standard of weights and measures. America uses a foot as a measure of length, and they were saying that there was a nationwide standard of a foot, being exactly 12 inches in length. The reason they wanted it fixed is so that anyone in America could rely on the foot as an equal measurement. A foot in Georgia would be equal to a foot in Arizona. However, this was written before the day of the 7-foot centers in professional basketball. A foot is not a foot when you're over 7 feet tall. But our founding fathers were obviously hoping that our dollar would have a constant value anywhere in the United States. But as we are seeing and will continue to see, money does not have a constant value. And that is because the bankers do not want a dollar to have a constant value, because the bankers can make a profit as they increase and then decrease the quantity of money, as long as they're the ones increasing and decreasing the quantity of money, and strangely enough, they are. I've often wanted to write a national best-selling book on how to make a killing in the stock market. It would only have one page, which would read, buy low, sell high. And if you knew which way the market was going to move, because you knew when the money supply would be increased or decreased, you could make a killing in the stock market by buying low and selling high. Now let me quote Article 1 Section 10 of the Constitution. No state, meaning Arizona, Georgia, Louisiana, Michigan, you name it, no state shall coin money or make anything but gold and silver coins a tender in payment of debt. Since the state could not coin money, they were relying on the federal government to do exactly what the Constitution allows them to do, coin money. But only a small percentage of our money in America is coined today. I can remember asking the Attorney General of Arizona in a public forum years ago how I could pay my taxes to the state of Arizona without gold and silver coins in circulation. His answer was, listen to this, I don't understand your question. But to be extremely honest with you, I think he did understand. And the tragic thing is that I believe that he knew that every penny collected by the state of Arizona in taxes is being unconstitutionally collected. Now let me discuss just who does have the power over America's money. This is a book that I was given when I was a student in a class called Money and Banking in the Business College at the University of Arizona. It is called, as you can see, the Federal Reserve System, Purposes and Functions, and it was printed by the Federal Reserve System itself. And I want to read just this short paragraph at the beginning of chapter 1 of the book. Here's what it says. Function of the Federal Reserve System. An efficient monetary mechanism is indispensable to the steady development of the nation's resources and a rising standard of living. The function of the Federal Reserve System is to foster a flow of credit and money. Notice, foster a flow of money that will facilitate orderly economic growth, a stable dollar, and long-run balance in our international payments. Now let's go back to the Constitution once again. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 5 reads, Congress shall have the power to coin money and regulate the value thereof. So there is no power to delegate this authority to anyone else, meaning a corporation, a state, or the people. Therefore, there is no power to create a Federal Reserve System. Only Congress shall have the power. But they unconstitutionally gave that power to the Federal Reserve. The book says this: on December 23, 1913, President Woodrow Wilson signed the Federal Reserve Act establishing the Federal Reserve System. That means that Congress, which had no power to create the Federal Reserve, just did so. And President Wilson, who like Congress had taken an oath to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution, just ignored his oath of office. But the Congress and the President did it anyway. I found this photograph on the internet and saved it for the day I would use it. And today is the day I will use it. It shows a young man with a copy of the Constitution and a homemade sign that reads, "The Constitution of the United States found in a dumpster behind the Capitol." I believe that this photograph certainly could be referring to the creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913 by President Woodrow Wilson and the Congress. I would now like to discuss the evidence that the Federal Reserve was not this nation's first central bank. We have had at least two central banks before 1913, and I would like to offer you a brief review of the subject. In 1776, the American Revolution was fought against England. In 1791, America created the first central bank of the United States for a period of 20 years. But in 1811, the 20-year charter was not renewed. So the next year, in 1812. By coincidence, England fought the War of 1812 against America. And in 1816, the United States created the Second Bank of the United States for another 20 years. But in 1836, the 20-year charter it had was not renewed. So, in 1837, the European bankers started planning America's Civil War, and in 1861, the Civil War started and ended 4 years later in 1865. And to pay for the costs of the war, President Abraham Lincoln issued the greenback dollar, which was not borrowed but just issued. So the war ended in 1865, and the bankers did not get a third bank of the United States. But to convince the American people to create one, the bankers changed their strategy and started planning bank runs, the first in 1873 and the second in 1893 and a third one in 1907. And finally, America created the permanent Federal Reserve in 1913. I believe that it is no accident that each of our first two wars were followed by central banks. Those wars had been planned by the European bankers to force America into the creation of a central bank to pay for them. And each of those two banks were given a 20-year charter because the American people did not want to create a permanent central bank. After the Civil War failed to create a third central bank, the bankers changed their strategy, as I said, to creating bank runs to convince the American people that we needed a permanent central bank. Accusations were raised that the state-chartered banks were being run by incompetent bankers, and what we needed was a federal central bank. I think it is now important to give you a simple explanation of what a bank run is to show you how the international bankers used them as a way to convince the American people that America needed a central bank. As I've said, I live in Tucson, Arizona, and let's just say that 9 of my friends and I decide to create a bank called the Last Bank of Tucson. We didn't have any money for capital improvements, but we did get a great price on the rental of this magnificent building. We thought it was a nice touch that the building had a covered walkway where we could get our horses out of the sun when we went into the bank to conduct our business. Now, we each contributed $1,000, so our beginning capital was $10,000. Let's just say that each of us goes into the bank a year later to withdraw our $1,000, but none of us knew the others were going to do that as well. The bank manager we hired would tell each of us that he could not honor any of our individual requests because he simply did not have the money on hand. He would explain that, like any other bank, he had made loans to others who needed the money, let's say, to make a down payment on a house they wanted to buy. We would insist that he called these individuals that he had loaned the money to and asked them to return the money he had loaned them. The manager would say that each of these individuals would say that they no longer had the money because they had given it to someone else, and that they in turn didn't have it any longer either. This is called a bank run when a bank does not have the money on hand to pay all of its depositors. You see, the banks do make loans from their depositors' money placed in a savings account. If Tucson's story got out to others in America that a local bank was denying their depositors their money, many others would race to their bank to withdraw their money because they thought their bank could also be insolvent as well. And when they did, they would discover that their bank also had made loans from their deposits and didn't have the money any longer either. and this would start a nationwide bank run. And the international bankers would then declare that all of these local banks were being run by a bunch of crooks, and what this nation needed would be, guess what, America? A central bank called the Federal Reserve. As I've said, bank runs have happened at least 3 times in America's past after the Civil War: 1873, 1893, and 1907. This is the photograph taken during the bank run of 1907, when all of these depositors came to the Knickerbocker Bank in New York City demanding their money, and the bank had admitted that they no longer could honor their requests. And when J.P. Morgan, the nation's leading banker at the time, suggested that a central bank was needed, the American people allowed the international bankers to create the Federal Reserve banking system in 1913. And the fact that it was international banker J.P. Morgan who had started the rumor that the Knickerbocker Bank was insolvent when he knew it wasn't, was quickly buried in the turmoil created during the bank run of 1907. So in 1913, the international bankers got what they had wanted: a privately owned bank that had the power to print paper money out of nothing, loan it to the government at interest. Now that is as simple and is as brief as I can make it. But I'm hoping that you can see that there was a common thread through the period of 1776 to 1913, the need of the European central bankers to create a permanent central bank in America. This is all once again amply documented in my book entitled The Unseen Hand. Now let's ask the pertinent question: what type of success has the Federal Reserve System had? Has